Chapter 91. Even admitting defeat was a competition. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 91. Even admitting defeat was a competition. As the heatwave swept across the entire arena again, everyone was stunned. What happened? Didn't Silver Shield clearly have the upper hand just now? Everyone was already cheering for him. How could there be such a huge reversal in just 1 second? How was God Slayer able to launch the same powerful attack again? How long had it been? 5 seconds. 4 seconds. How could such a powerful attack have such a short cooldown time? Obviously, many people were shocked by Mike's methods. This was no longer a question of strength. No one could beat him. No, let alone people. No boss or NPC could beat him. For new players, their impression of bosses and NPCs was very limited. They did not know how strong a truly powerful boss or NPC was. If they knew, they would be even more certain that no NPC or boss could defeat Mike. Well, at least Mike knew this very well. Unless the opponent was a god, Mike could basically pass through Second World unhindered. Not to mention killing a level 25 knight player. Mike turned around and left the stage. The next moment, he was teleported to the king's side. The king's eyes were filled with fear, and the other spectators could not help but look in his direction. No one cared about the next match. At the church's resurrection point, Silver Shield walked out and looked at the chilly street. He could not help but sigh. Sigh, God Slayer was too strong. He simply could not understand how he did it. It was impossible to win against such an opponent, right? Thinking of this, Silver Shield could not help but comforted himself. At least the 3rd or 4th place would be rewarded with gold coins. At least he gained some profit. As long as he had his shield, it should not be a problem for him to snatch the 3rd place after defeating the loser in the next round. However, in the next moment, he suddenly realized something off. Why did he feel as if his left hand was a little empty? He looked down and was stunned. Where's my shield? Dying in the arena should not drop any equipment, right? His heart almost stopped beating. He quickly opened his backpack. Seeing his beloved shield lying quietly in his backpack, Silver Shield let out a sigh of relief. This was his most important treasure. If it really dropped, he might as well not live anymore. He could just jump off the building. However, just as he was about to take out the shield and equip it on his left hand, a surprising scene appeared. Your level is not high enough to use this equipment. Silver Shield was slightly stunned. Isn't this shield's level requirement level 25? Didn't I just use it? Why can't I use it all of a sudden? He subconsciously looked at his level, and then he was completely stunned. How the hell did I become level 24? We can die in the arena without losing any experience, right? Moreover, even if he did lose experience, he should not have directly dropped to level 24. After all, he only had about 20% of his experience bar left from leveling up. Even if he lost experience, he should still have 70% left. He looked at his own experience bar and was even more surprised. Level 24. There was still 20% left to level 25. After he saw his experience bar, Silver Shield completely collapsed. It was not that he had lost 10% of his experience. He had actually lost 100% of his experience. He really went from level 25 plus 80% of his experience to level 24 plus 80% of his experience. What the hell happened? Silver Shield hugged his head with both hands, unable to accept this reality. If he dropped back to level 24, he would not be able to equip his shield. In other words, his greatest reliance was no longer useful. Then, what should he do in the following battle? Was he confident that he could defeat his opponent? Why did he suddenly drop in level? He thought about it for a long time but could not come to a conclusion. In the end, he took a look at the battle record and found a clue. You have been killed by player God Slayer. There is no loss if you die in the arena. Affected by curse power, your level has decreased by 1 level. Curse power. Looking at the 2 system messages, Silver Shield regained his composure. From the first message, he could see that the rules had not changed, and nothing strange had happened. It seemed that the cause of his losses was due to this curse power. As for where this curse power came from, Silver Shield's face revealed a hint of fear. A bold guess emerged in his heart. Could it be God Slayer? The more Silver Shield thought about it, the more he felt that this was precisely the case. Other than it being related to God Slayer, he could not think of any other answer. If it was the arena's problem, this matter would have long spread throughout the new region. After all, many players had just been killed in the arena. He did not expect God Slayer to actually have curse power, a skill that could force people to drop in levels. This was simply a huge piece of news. Silver Shield immediately opened the forum and began to type out a post. He had to let everyone know about this. As for the following competition, Silver Shield was already too lazy to participate. Anyway, he would most likely not be able to get 3rd place. Even if he directly forfeited, he could still get the 4th place reward. The most important thing now was to post quickly. Silver Shield, who was standing on the street, immediately got busy. On the battle stage, 2 players were currently fighting back and forth. One of them was a fighter whose ID was Explosive Wave Fist. As for the other player, it was Sky-Splitting Sword. That was right, it was the player who made a bet with Mike and chose to go offline after he lost. Although his credibility was a problem, his strength was decent. At least he could stand out among the ordinary players. Otherwise, he would not have received the scholarship from the school. At this moment, the battle was coming to an end. The 2 of them were very nervous. Both of them did not want to make a mistake at such a crucial moment. After all, this battle could be considered as the battle that decided the 2nd place winner. Even if one could not obtain a weapon bestowed by the king, one could at least obtain a skill book. Compared to a skill book, the gold reward was much worse. Therefore, they had to win. The 2 of them fought fiercely and switched between offense and defense. In the end, Sky-Splitting Sword obtained the victory. It was clearly a very exciting battle, but the audience was not very interested. After witnessing God Slayer's overwhelming power, it was hard for them to be interested in such an ordinary battle. Many people were just interested to see how God Slayer could instantly kill his opponent and win the championship. Who would care about the others? After the battle ended, Sky-Splitting Sword was teleported out of the arena. The next second, he was teleported back again. Opposite him was a yawning God Slayer. He had waited too long for this stupid skill book and was on the verge of falling asleep. Fortunately, it was the finals now. As long as he raised his hand and surrendered, the skill book would be his. With this thought in mind, Mike revealed a confident smile. Just as he was about to raise his hand, he heard Sky-Splitting Sword say, "I give up." Mike was slightly taken aback. What the F***CK? Chapter 92. The Adventure Legion, God Slayer became an official. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 92. The Adventure Legion, God Slayer became an official. What, why? Mike could not comprehend the current situation. Even if his enemy was strong, to the extent where they were undefeatable. Wait, the strength I've displayed would indeed make people feel devastated, however. Is it really good to directly surrender in the finals? Oh, that was my original plan too, then I guess it's fine. After thinking about it, Mike realized that it was not that big of a deal for the other party to surrender. Rather, it would be strange if the other party did not surrender. He looked at Sky-Splitting Sword, who avoided his gaze, sighed, and said, "Let's meet outside the arena later." Hearing this, Sky-Splitting Sword trembled in fear and almost instantly logged off. After all, he still owed the other party 10,000 Federation coins, so it was expected for him to feel guilty. However, Mike narrowed his eyes and added, "You better not think about escaping, or I'll make it impossible for you to survive in Second World." Hearing this, Sky-Splitting Sword revealed a despaired expression. The importance of Second World was almost no different from the real world. What did it mean to not be able to survive in Second World? His life would be over. Sky-Splitting Sword believed that what Mike said was definitely not empty talk. He really had the ability. As an expert with such power, it was indeed not difficult to do such a thing. In the new region, God Slayer might only be able to hunt him down or spend money to hire people to hunt him down. However, things would be different in the big region. For players at God Slayer's level, there would definitely be countless large guilds vying for him to sign their contract. At that time, God Slayer would only need to add one more requirement to the contract. Chase after and kill Sky-Splitting Sword repeatedly. Then, I'll be done for. Thinking of this, Sky-Splitting Sword gave up struggling. Thus, a strange scene appeared. Although the entire arena was dissatisfied with the final match, after all, someone directly surrendered without putting up a fight. However, everyone's emotions were still running high. After all, God Slayer winning the championship was what everyone wanted to see the most. He deserved it. At this moment, as the referee, the deputy commander of the Royal Guards, Lucius was also very excited. He saved his own life, so of course, he was excited. He walked to the stage and announced loudly to everyone, "This City of Light martial arts competition has officially ended. The final champion is God Slayer. Next, let's welcome the king to give a speech for the champion." Applause immediately broke out in the arena. A moment later, the king stood up, and the applause gradually stopped. With the amplification spell cast by the palace mage beside him, the king's voice spread throughout the entire City of Light. Countless people outside the arena could not help but stop and listen carefully. "Everyone, I'm very happy to be able to give a speech for the champion of this tournament, Mr. God Slayer. His strength has completely conquered everyone. I believe that no one will have any objections to this result. If anyone has any objections, please come up to the stage and challenge Mr. God Slayer." Upon hearing this, the audience in the arena burst into laughter. Seeing the audience's reactions, the king was very satisfied with his humor and continued, "All right, since no one has any objections, I'll continue. Since the ranking of this tournament has been decided, then I'll give out the prizes for the warriors in this tournament. At the same time, I also want to announce an important matter." At this point, the king deliberately paused for a few seconds, leaving this time for the audience to discuss. After a few seconds, the king looked at Mike from afar and continued, "I have decided to appoint Mr. God Slayer as the commander of the Adventurer Legion of the City of Light." Hua! The entire arena was in an uproar. In the history of the City of Light, there had never been an Adventurer Legion. Furthermore, there had never been an example of an adventurer becoming a Legion commander. This decision was unusual, and it could even be considered a bold move. That was in the eyes of NPCs, adventurers, or players had always been difficult to control. They seemed to have their own way of doing things. No one knew where they came from. What was scarier was that they could not be truly killed. Was it really appropriate for such a group of people to form a legion in the City of Light? However, even if the NPCs were a little worried about this matter, no one would bring it up. Unless they wanted to suffer the wrath of God Slayer. Obviously, no one wanted to. On the contrary, the players' reactions were completely different from the NPCs. The players' reactions were much more excited. What, God Slayer can become a Legion commander? Oh my God! This news is too shocking. If we successfully join God Slayer's Legion, can we get our salary from the City of Light? That seems to be the case. Very quickly, the excitement in the arena changed. The players shouted at the top of their lungs. Big Boss God Slayer, let me join your legion. Big Boss, I'm very strong, and I'm very obedient. Big Boss, I'm willing to become your death squad, let me join. Big Boss, I can sleep with you. Big Boss, I'm a 36E. All sorts of shouts appeared in the arena, causing the surrounding NPCs to look at them with disgust. As expected, adventurers were all such people. They were too uncultured. On the stage, Mike smiled and lifted his hands. In an instant, the entire arena fell silent. The silence came even faster than when it was the king. This made the king a little unhappy. Everyone was waiting for Mike to speak. Thank you for your support, but I do not plan to recruit anyone for this legion. I will discuss the details with the king before starting. Hearing this, the players were disappointed but were understanding. Such a huge matter, it was natural to discuss it with the king. When the king heard Mike's words, he smiled with satisfaction. It seemed that this adventurer respected him a lot. He did not waste too much time and immediately asked the court magician to teleport him to the arena to hand out the rewards to the first and second place winners. Sky-Splitting Sword was standing beside Mike with a nervous look. What was given to him was a skill book. As for what kind of skill it was, he did not even have the mood to look at it. Mike, on the other hand, was lost in thought as he looked at the weapon he had just acquired. Chapter 93. Sword of the King and Shadow Strike. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 93. Sword of the King and Shadow Strike. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation, Sword of the King, Quality. Legendary, Attack. 700, Weight. 1.5 kilograms, Usage Level. 25, Special Effect. King's Leader, God. Tier Passive Enhancement. Increases all attributes of all members of the party by 100%. After seeing the attributes of this weapon, Mike felt lucky for not being the first to surrender. He almost lost such a powerful weapon for a lousy skill book. That was too stupid. The quality of this weapon and the Sword of Meredith were both golden legendary quality weapons. Although the Sword of Meredith looked more invincible, it was actually due to Mike's SSS. Grade talent. If it was anyone else, it would have been the Sword of the King that was stronger. The original effect of this weapon would have increased all attributes by 10%. Regardless, just this skill alone was already very powerful. After all, this was a skill that improved all attributes. It was a powerful skill that would increase attack power, HP, mana, defense, movement speed, and all other attributes. Without this skill, this weapon's stats would at most reach purple excellent quality. Mike had decided to equip this weapon in his right hand for future battles. His left hand would be the main attacker, and he would equip the Sword of Meredith to deal damage. His right hand would be the secondary attacker, and he would equip the Sword of the King as a buff. After he made up his mind, Mike looked at the king. Obviously, since the king had given him such a powerful weapon in the position as the commander of the Adventurer Legion, the king must have something to tell him. He took the initiative to whisper, "I'll look for you in the palace later." Hearing this, the king nodded slightly. After all, this was not a convenient place to talk. He casually praised Mike and Sky-Splitting Sword before returning to the VIP seats. After all, there was still a battle between the third and fourth place. He was responsible for giving out the rewards. Meanwhile, Mike brought Sky-Splitting Sword out of the arena. Along the way, Sky-Splitting Sword felt a little uneasy. If God Slayer wanted him to hand over the 10,000 Federation coins, he would not dare to refuse. After all, if he did not hand over the money, the other party would make it impossible for him to survive in Second World. However, if he handed over the money, his following days would be very difficult. At the very least, his legs would be broken by his father. Thinking of this, a hint of despair appeared on Sky-Splitting Sword's face. It was only a 2-minute journey, but he found it excruciatingly long. Finally, the two of them came to a corner with no one around. Sky-Splitting Sword was thinking about ways to ask God Slayer to let him off. However, what Mike said made him slightly stunned. "What's the effect in the skill book you just obtained?" Sky-Splitting Sword was stunned for a moment, then quickly took out the skill book from his backpack and checked it. Then, he sent the skill book's attributes to Mike via private message. Shadow Strike, Quality. Outstanding, Occupation. Unlimited, Active Skill, Mana Cost. 200, Cooldown. 60 seconds, after using the skill, the damage of the following attack will be increased by 50%. There will be no attack movements, and there will be no way to block it. Looking at the skill's introduction, Mike's eyes lit up. As expected of an outstanding quality skill book. This skill was way too powerful. He wondered what would happen if he used law to change it into a passive skill. This was a special skill that could only be learned through a skill book. It was impossible to learn this skill from any class instructor. In other words, if he missed this skill, he would practically never be able to encounter it again. Mike thought for a moment and took the initiative to speak. "You should still remember that you owe me 10,000 Federation coins before, right?" Hearing Mike's question, Sky-Splitting Sword trembled and finally nodded. This kind of thing could not be avoided. Admitting was the only option. Seeing that Sky-Splitting Sword did not run away, Mike nodded with satisfaction and said, "I'll give you two choices now. 1. Pay the money immediately and we'll forget about this matter. 2. Give me this skill book and I won't pursue the matter of the money. You choose." After saying that, Mike fell silent. Meanwhile, Sky-Splitting Sword revealed a pained expression. He could also see that this skill book was very powerful. He really could not bear to hand over this skill book. However, he was even more reluctant to hand over the money. That was 10,000 Federation coins. In comparison, no matter how powerful this skill book was, it was definitely not worth 10,000 Federation coins. Even if it was sold to rich people, it could only be sold for 5,000 Federation coins at most. If Mike or Super Rich heard this, they would definitely laugh out loud. He had overly underestimated rich people. If Super Rich saw this skill book, he would not even bat an eye if he was asked to spend 20,000 Federation coins. Otherwise, why would he spend so much money on a bunch of green equipment? Of course, green equipment itself was valuable. It would not be an exaggeration to say that green equipment could not be bought even if one had the money. After all, it was very difficult to produce good equipment in the early stages. Even if it was green equipment, everyone would only keep it for themselves. Who would be willing to sell it? Therefore, the price of Mike's equipment was indeed high, but it was not a loss for Super Rich. As for this skill book, currently, it was only worth about 5,000 Federation coins on the market. However, rich people would be willing to spend more money to get it. If he used this book to pay off his debts, Sky-Splitting Sword could either view it as a profit or a loss. In the end, Sky-Splitting Sword finally made a decision. "If I give this skill book to you, then everything that happened before will be written off, right?" He hesitated for a moment and asked. Mike smiled and nodded. "In fact, I'm actually very rich. I still have more than 1,000,000 Federation coins in my account." The meaning behind his words was very simple. "If I didn't meet you today, I wouldn't have bothered to ask you for this money. As long as you're willing to hand over the skill book, I'll treat it as spending money to buy your skill. Anyway, I don't care about this little bit of money." Sky-Splitting Sword understood what Mike meant. Finally, he gritted his teeth and sent a trade request to Mike. Seeing the skill book on the trade panel, Mike smiled and agreed to trade. He did not choose to learn the skill immediately. Instead, he directly left this place and headed to the palace. With Mike's status as the commander of the Adventurer Legion among the humans and his human affinity skill, he naturally would not be stopped anywhere. He arrived at the meeting room with ease. The king had not returned yet, and there was no one in the meeting room. Mike took out a strange black book, Law. Change Shadow Strike into a passive skill. Chapter 94. Using Law, Powerful Shadow Strike and Phantom Clone. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 94. Using Law, Powerful Shadow Strike and Phantom Clone. If Mike were to evaluate and choose the best among all the items and equipment he had on him, then it would definitely not be the Sword of Meredith or the Sword of the King. It would be Law. This black book was worthy of the quality of divine artifact. It could change any special effect at will, and there were no consequences. Coupled with Mike's SSS grade talent, God.tier passive enhancement, it was simply the strongest combination. He could transform any special effect into a passive skill. In the next moment, the shadow strike in Mike's hand disappeared, and a new skill appeared in his skill pane. Shadow Strike, God.tier passive enhancement. Attack power increased by 2000%. No attacking actions would be needed and the attack could not be blocked, guaranteed hit. Ednel.co. The original 50% increase in damage became 2000%. The 60-second cooldown time was also directly erased. In other words, Mike's attacks from now on could not be blocked. Moreover, Mike's enemy would die before they could even see him make a move. Terrifying. It was simply too terrifying. Second World had turned into a terrifying game. Just imagine. A player stood in front of Mike, ready to fight with his life on the line. Suddenly, before he saw any actions from Mike, he was already dead. Wasn't this a terrifying game? Oh right, there's another skill I can try. Mike thought of another skill, which was Phantom Clone. This skill was obtained when he joined the Evil God cult. Mike had not used it yet. He wanted to try and see what effect Phantom Clone would have if he switched to a passive skill. Of course, if the effect was not good, Mike could switch back to an active skill without any losses. He used Law again. Change Phantom Clone into a passive skill. The next moment, Law emitted a black light. In Mike's skill pane, the description of Phantom Clone had some changes. The original description of Phantom Clone was like this. Phantom Clone. A clone that will be controlled by the host's own will can be created, but the clone will have limited independent movements. Moreover, the clone will take away half of the original body's attributes. After the clone dies, the attributes would return to the original body. Phantom Clone that had become a passive skill had the description below. Phantom Clone, God.tier passive enhancement, immediately obtain a transparent Phantom Clone. Other than the main body, no one else can see the clone regardless of the method used. The clone has all of the main body's attributes, and it has the ability to think on its own. The way it thinks is almost no different from the main body. The clone can perfectly execute the orders within its range of ability that are given by the main body. The clone will not take away the main body's attributes. After the clone dies, it will immediately revive by the main body's side. Seeing this skill introduction, Mike was slightly surprised. This was the first time he had seen such a long skill introduction. Moreover, after carefully reading this introduction, Mike once again felt the magic of the second world. This was clearly a direct creation of himself. Moreover, it was a completely transparent self. He looked around and found his clone behind him. This colorless clone looked exactly like him. The clone stood there expressionlessly and waited for his orders. Mike thought for a moment and said, "If I ask you to kill 100 living beings without negatively affecting me, can you do it?" The clone nodded and immediately walked out of the meeting room. Mike thought for a moment and decided to follow him out to take a look. What if this clone rushed into the street and randomly killed and added a bounty to himself? Although the skill description said that the clone's intelligence was the same as his, and it could perfectly complete the orders that he gave. However, Mike was still a little worried unless he saw it with his very own eyes. He followed the transparent clone out of the palace, and then out of the City of Light. Throughout the entire process, Mike and the clone's speed was very fast. Because the clone's ability was exactly the same as Mike's, the clone also had swift steps. The two quickly arrived at a monster encampment outside the city. The clone did not hesitate at all. It immediately raised its hand and released a small fireball at the group of monsters in front of it. The next moment, the fireball exploded on the spot. The clone turned its head and looked at Mike expressionlessly. It did not move. Mike looked at his quest bar. Evil God's nutrients. Kill 100 lifeforms. 100 out of 100, Mike sucked in a breath of cold air. Satisfied. Insanely satisfied. This clone was perfect. He thought for a moment and gave a complicated order to the clone. Next, you just need to find a place where no one is around and keep farming experience points. The requirements may be more complicated. First, try to increase the efficiency of farming experience points. That is to say, try to find high-level monsters to kill. Second, do not accidentally injure other players. This might cause me to have a red name. Third, pick up all the equipment above blue quality and send them to the warehouse. Can you do all of these? The clone stood in front of Mike expressionlessly for a few seconds. After about 5 seconds, he nodded and walked in a direction. Mike took a look. That was the direction of Victory City. It seemed that the clone was planning to fight monsters near Victory City. Mike was completely relieved. As long as he had this clone, he could gain EXP and equipment without doing anything. It was awesome. At this rate, wouldn't he reach level 100 soon? Thinking of this, Mike smiled in satisfaction and returned to the City of Light. He still remembered his promise of meeting the king in the palace. When he arrived at the entrance of the palace, Mike asked the guards. Is the king back? Respected Commander God Slayer, the king is back. The way the guards addressed Mike had changed. After all, Mike was now the Legion commander personally appointed by the king, so there was no problem addressing him as such. Mike smiled and walked into the meeting room. Pushing the door open, the king was already sitting. Mike pulled out a chair and sat beside the king. He took the initiative to ask, "You appointed me as the commander of the Adventurer Legion. You must have something to tell me." The king looked at Mike seriously and then nodded. "Soon, I'm afraid that war will break out on this continent." Chapter 95. God Slayer was a well-respected and notorious villain. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 95. God Slayer was a well-respected and notorious villain. War. Hearing this term, Mike was slightly stunned. Although Second World was very realistic, he had played it for 30 years in his previous life, and NPCs rarely engaged in wars. Who knew that after he reincarnated, a war would break out in the new region just 3 days after it opened? Something was wrong with this situation. Mike frowned slightly. Every new region was actually a parallel world to the Second World's big region. A lot of special situations would occur in the parallel world due to the result of various situations. However, under normal circumstances, it was very difficult for such a big change to occur. In other words, the person who caused the war was most likely Mike himself. Only an exaggerated action of his level could have such a big impact. This time, Mike was a little confused. Which doing of his had triggered the war? Killing a large number of NPCs in Victory City. Killing a large number of followers of the Temple of the God of Fire. Helping the evil god obtain a large amount of nutrients. Accepting the mission from the Death God. Mike thought for a long time but still could not come up with an answer. However, everything seemed to be a potential trigger for the war. In the end, Mike could not help but take the initiative to ask, what's the cause of the war? The king's eyes moved slightly, and the corner of his mouth twitched as he said, since Victory City suffered a terrorist attack, many people were sacrificed. Now, the trolls and dwarves that border Victory City seem to be getting restless, and the war is on the verge of breaking out. Mike was silent. He really was the cause of the war. He could see that the king was looking at him strangely. It seemed that the king was also very clear that Victory City's NPCs were all killed by him. Nevertheless, he had no choice. Be no calm, he had to utilize Mike's and other adventurers' power to win this war. Let the culprit who started the war come out and pacify the war. How ironic. Mike nodded, indicating that he understood. Then, he asked, then, as the commander of the Adventurer Legion, do I have any benefits? Of course. The king seemed to have known that Mike would ask this question, so he quickly answered, during the war, every enemy killed will have a reward of 10 honor points. At the same time, as the commander of the Adventurer Legion, your status is the same as a general, and you will receive a considerable monthly salary. Mike nodded slightly. He did not show much emotion on the surface. However, he was filled with joy in his heart. The status of a general was basically no different from that of a duke. It could be said that he had a very high status. Moreover, his salary should be really high. As for the general, the salary should be more than 10,000 gold coins per month. This was very good news for Mike. Moreover, Mike needed to replenish his honor points. Last time, Mike had killed the NPCs of Victory City and lost plenty of honor points. Thinking of this, he opened his status bar to see how many honor points he had now. Honor points .526, 400, honor level. Notorious, Mike fell silent again. No wonder he felt that the NPCs were looking at him strangely today. Apparently, he now had a notorious status. Mike tried to imagine the attitude of the NPCs towards him. Yes, Mike was a respectable, notorious villain. This was too strange. It seemed that it was necessary to quickly increase honor points. Ahem. Mike coughed twice and asked again, when will the war start? Soon, maybe in the next few days. The king's tone did not sound optimistic. Mike nodded and did not further question. At this moment, a golden light suddenly enveloped Mike's body. Mike was slightly stunned, and the king was also slightly shocked. What was going on? This golden light seemed to be. Mike looked at his level. Level 33. It seemed that the experience gained by the clone had upgraded him. Mike quickly accepted this fact. However, the king was completely stunned. Why did God Slayer suddenly become stronger? What happened? Mike did not give him an answer. Instead, he left the meeting room. After all, he had already finished his business. There was no need for him to continue talking to this NPC. This kind of behavior was a waste of time for the players. Now, he still had many things to do. For example, he had to go to the evil god cult to submit a mission. For example, he had to recruit people to join his Adventurer Legion. For example, level up. After all, he had to go back to school tomorrow. His level would have a certain impact on his score tomorrow. Naturally, the higher the level, the better. After arriving at the gate of the City of Light, Mike hesitated. The journey to the cult was a bit far from Victory City. He was too lazy to go. Recruiting people was troublesome. He was too lazy for that. There was no need to worry about leveling up. Mike was absolutely confident that being at level 33 would place him as the first in the new region. With this level and his current strength, he could definitely get the highest grade from the school. It seemed that he did not need to deliberately level up anymore. In that case, it seemed as if Mike had nothing to do. He thought about it and decided to go offline to search for a new house. After all, he was going to school tomorrow, and he might be busy for a while. He might as well solve the problem of buying a house today. Thinking of this, Mike immediately chose to go offline. Opening his eyes, Mike's consciousness returned to the body in the small room. Looking around at the dilapidated small room, Mike could not help but feel a little emotional. In his previous life, he simply did not have the extra financial ability to change a house. This room had actually accompanied him for 30 years in his previous life. He did not think that after reincarnating, he would leave in just 3 days. He was still a little reluctant. However, for the sake of a better quality of life, Mike still decided he would go out and buy a house. He took out his cell phone to call Tom. However, after some thought, he decided not to. Although little fat Tom already knew that his good friend was now loaded. Though if Tom knew that he now had more than 1 million Federation coins in his account, Mike was afraid that it might scare him. His good friend could know that he was rich. However, it was not necessary to quickly let him know the extent of his richness. Mike did not want to agitate his best friend. Besides, Tom was not like him, who could easily level up. The grades were due tomorrow, so Tom should be working hard to level up. It was better not to delay his best friend's matters. Mike walked out of his room and stopped a taxi by the roadside. "Hello, please take me to the sales office nearest to the top high school in New York City. I want a higher-end one." Chapter 96. You will definitely earn a very good income today. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 96. You will definitely earn a very good income today. The driver looked at Mike in the rearview mirror with a hint of surprise in his eyes. However, he remained silent. Anyway, he did not think the young man was going to buy a house. After all, he looked so poor. Sure enough, Mike had yet to purchase any good clothes. It was mainly due to his busy schedule. If he had the time, he might as well improve his strength in the game. The taxi quickly started and drove to its destination. About 20 minutes later, the car stopped at the entrance of a sales office. The driver turned his head and smiled and said, "Young man, we're here. This is the best sales office of the #1 high school in New York City." When the driver said this, there was a hint of mockery in his eyes. In his opinion, this kid in the back seat would probably blush and request him to change the destination. After all, this place was too high-end. Not to mention such a poor kid, even an ordinary family's husband and wife probably could not afford to buy a house here. However, Mike showed no signs of cowardice. Instead, he calmly swiped his card to pay the fare, then directly got out of the car and walked to the sales office. When the driver saw this scene, he was slightly stunned. Then, he helplessly shook his head. It looked like this kid was going to embarrass himself after entering. When Mike arrived at the sales office, a beautiful woman wearing a uniform immediately walked over with a signature smile and asked, "Hello, student. Are you looking for someone?" Actually, this question itself was not right. When someone came to the sales office, their first reaction should be to ask if they were here to buy a house, and not to assume that they were here to look for someone. However, she found nothing wrong with asking this question. After all, Mike's clothes were really too ordinary. They even revealed a hint of poverty. Presumably, it was a colleague of hers. However, when Mike heard this question, he gave a very surprising answer. "I'm here to buy a house. Are there any nice houses that are close to the #1 high school in New York City?" When she heard this question, the beautiful woman was stunned for a few seconds before she finally reacted. "You mean, you're here to buy a house?" "Yes," Mike answered calmly. He did not find it strange. Even if a person dressed very shabbily, it should not conflict with wanting to buy a house. Maybe this person won the lottery. However, clearly, the beautiful woman did not think that the lottery was that easy to win. She covered her mouth and could not help but laugh. The other staff members were also attracted by her laughter and could not help but look over. Mike frowned slightly and asked, "Are you done laughing? If you don't want to take this deal, I will find someone else to buy it from." When the beauty heard this, she laughed even more happily. She shrugged and said, "If you want to find someone else, that would really be a great help to me. Please go ahead, I'm very busy. After saying that, she looked at Mike with a teasing smile. She seemed to be waiting for Mike to show a look of embarrassment and anger. However, Mike would not do that. Although he looked like an 18-year-old boy now, he had already gone through his whole life. His temperament was completely incomparable to that of an 18-year-old boy. Did Mike know why this woman had this attitude? To put it bluntly, she judged people by their appearance. Though he was neither angry nor dissatisfied. It was all a waste of Mike's time. The woman felt that her time was precious, and so did Mike. He looked around, glanced at the staff around him, and finally looked at an introverted girl. Mike immediately walked over and asked, "Are you free? I want to buy a house that suits me." When the girl saw Mike coming over, she seemed a little nervous, but she immediately nodded and said, "Yes, yes, I'm free." "Then, let me introduce you to some property." Mike nodded and followed the girl to the sofa at the side and sat down. The other staff members gathered together and started to discuss about Mike and the girl. "Ha, this poor guy actually found Linda. Linda is actually willing to waste time presenting to this poor guy, how ridiculous. No wonder her performance is the lowest every month, she doesn't even have the most basic observation ability. In our industry, the most basic ability is to see how much money the customer has. I think Linda should change her profession as soon as possible." At this point, they laughed in unison. Linda, who was on the sofa, naturally heard these words. She blushed and pursed her lips, but she still did not say anything. It seemed as if she was used to it. Mike saw this scene and asked, "Aren't you angry about what they said?" Linda did not expect Mike to ask this. She glanced at Mike and finally shook her head. Mike asked again, "Why aren't they willing to serve me, but you are?" This time, Linda answered quickly. "Because you are a customer." This answer was very simple and plain, but many people could not do it. Mike looked at her with admiration. He smiled slightly. "Don't worry, I won't let your efforts go to waste today." Linda did not say anything about this. She just nodded slightly and said thank you. Then, she continued to introduce the house to Mike. Mike also listened carefully to the introduction of the house. After all, he was here to buy a house. He had to look for a house of his liking. Mike would not be careless about where he would live in the future. Soon, Mike found a house that he liked under Linda's introduction. "This one is pretty good. Is there a finished product now?" Mike pointed at a house in the introduction book and asked. The girl was a little surprised, but she still nodded and said, "There is a finished product. Do you need me to bring you there for a viewing?" Mike smiled and said, "Thank you. Then please take me for a viewing." Mike immediately got up and walked straight out of the door. Linda also packed her things and quickly followed. Their actions made the beautiful woman burst into laughter again. In their eyes, Linda's efforts today would be in vain again. After walking out of the door, Mike directly stopped a taxi. However, Linda came up to remind him, "Sir, this place is very close to that house. We only need about 15 minutes to walk there." Mike waved his hand and said, "My time is very precious. Let's go by car." After saying that, Mike immediately boarded the car. Linda followed him without saying anything. She had already planned to pay for the car fee herself. Although the company would sometimes reimburse the car fee for their sales staff, this kind of situation would not be reimbursed. Because from the company's point of view, the probability of this customer paying for the house was very low. However, she was already used to it. Mike glanced at Linda from the rearview mirror and smiled. "Don't worry, as I said. You will definitely earn a very good income today." Chapter 97. It's so good to be rich. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 97. It's so good to be rich. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Actually, what Mike said was unpersuasive. It could be seen from the way he dressed. However, Linda did not serve Mike because she felt that Mike could afford the houses here. She did it because out of her dedication to her job. As long as customers were making inquiries, she should try her best to serve them. That was her thought. Linda only smiled softly and nodded while thanking Mike after she heard what he said. Mike also noticed that this introverted girl did not pay much attention to what he said. However, Mike did not pay much attention to this. After all, what he said was the truth and it did not matter if others did not believe him. They would know the truth later on. The taxi soon brought them to their destination. The moment Mike got out of the car, he was satisfied with the house as he laid eyes on it. There was a small garden in front of the house where the grass looked tidy and clean. It looked as if somebody tidied up the lawn frequently. The white walls and blue roof made this European-style house look very beautiful. The house was huge and had 3 floors. There seemed to be a small attic on the 3rd floor. Mike already felt satisfied from the outlook of the place. At this moment, the salesperson, Linda, walked over beside Mike and said, "This is the house you fancied just now and the selling price is $1 million. If you wish to purchase the house, I can help apply a discount for you. If you need any loan, I can help you obtain a suitable loan." Mike waved his hand when he heard this and said, "I don't need any discount or loans. Let's go in and take a look. If the house is suitable, I will directly pay the full amount." Linda was slightly stunned at this moment. He did not need any discounts or loans. He would pay the full amount. Was this man such a rich person? A hint of uncertainty and disbelief appeared in her gaze as she looked at Mike. After all, the way this young guy dressed just screamed poor. She was even wondering if Mike was lying to her. However, Mike did not notice this and directly walked toward the house. "Go in and have a look. I shall buy the house if it's suitable. By the way, did you bring the agreement with you?" Linda only managed to react after she heard this. She quickly took the agreement out from her bag and passed it to Mike. She then walked to the entrance and took out the key to unlock the door. Mike roughly went through the agreement and nodded in satisfaction. There were not any issues with the agreement and he could sign it. He raised his head and the door to the house had been unlocked at this moment. Mike could immediately see the style of the interior design. It was what he liked. A hint of nobleness could be seen in the minimalistic design, but it did not make others feel that the house was a cheap one. Instead, a hint of costliness could be seen from the minimalistic design. This met Mike's requirements perfectly. He had already decided to sign the purchase agreement now even though he had not walked into the house. However, he still had to take a look. Mike followed Linda and entered the house. Linda led Mike throughout the place and introduced the layout of the house one by one. There was a huge living room on the 1st floor. There was also a kitchen, maid's room, and others. The 2nd floor consisted of a master bedroom, 2 bedrooms, a toddler's room, and a study. There were also 2 bedrooms on the 3rd floor, accompanied by a gym and a walk-in closet. All the facilities were prepared and Mike could directly move in. Mike felt that spending $1 million to buy this house was not a loss. Even if there was a slight loss, Mike paid no attention to this small amount of money with his current financial power. If he wanted to earn money, he was capable of earning a couple of times of that amount a day. Anyways, he was capable of forging gold equipment in Second World as he pleased, and earning money was only a matter of willingness to Mike. He nodded in satisfaction as he stretched out his hand and said, "Have you brought a pen?" Linda was slightly stunned. She took the pen out from her bag and asked carefully, "You mean to say that, I'm buying this place? I will pay by card after signing this agreement." Ah! Linda was completely stunned. What was going on? He was buying the house just like that. Was this young man joking? She was stunned on the spot, but Mike did not pay much attention to her. He took over the pen and wrote his name on the agreement. He then took out his bank card and passed it to Linda. There's no password, just swipe the card for payment. Linda was stunned and was unable to react. Mike turned around and looked at Linda's surprised reaction before he said jokingly. Could it be that no payments are needed to buy houses from your company? No. We do need payment. Only then did Linda discover that she had lost composure and quickly took over the bank card from Mike with a blush on her face. She then took the POS machine out and completed the payment. Linda was once again stunned when she saw the POS machine indicate a successful payment. The payment had really succeeded. This young man actually had 1 million in his account. Wasn't he poor? A surprised expression was written all over Linda's face, but Mike was not angry in the slightest way. It was normal for others to think that he was a poor person based on the way he was dressed. On the contrary, it would be weird if somebody thought that Mike was rich after seeing how he was dressed. Mike proactively took the bank card back from Linda's hand and said with a soft smile. I told you that I would definitely let you earn money today. The blush on Linda's face deepened when she heard this. She did not believe what Mike said previously. Who would have expected him to sign the agreement and make the payment without a hint of hesitation? This was a truly rich man. However, Linda was unable to guess why Mike was dressed in such a crude way. Maybe it was a rich man pretending to be a poor man to experience life. It was difficult to understand the temperament of a rich person. Linda put away the agreement and bowed to Mike. Then, she directly left. As for Mike, he chose to stay and familiarize himself with the new house. After all, Linda had the keys and she passed them to him after he signed the agreement. As for the things that were in the small room, Mike decided to throw all of them away. Mike felt refreshed after he saw the new furniture and wide space. Surely, it was good to be rich. Mike secretly added the matter of making money into his life goals. Oh yes, I need to go back to school tomorrow. Let me buy some new clothes today. Although it was wrong to judge a person based on the way they were dressed, this was something one would do subconsciously and there was nothing one could do about it. Even though Mike did not pay much attention to this, buying some good quality clothing could avoid many unnecessary troubles. The meal he had previously and his experience when buying this house were very praxis examples. Without a hint of hesitation, he immediately walked out of his new house. After stopping a taxi by the side of the road, he went straight to his next destination. On the other hand, in the property sales gallery, everybody was shocked and they saw Linda coming back with a signed agreement. How was this possible? That poor man actually bought the house. Chapter 98. Linda's Lucky Star. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 98. Linda's Lucky Star. Are you sure you're not joking? Linda's colleagues had all gathered around and were looking at the contract over and over again. Linda was a little nervous and nodded wordlessly. I didn't expect that poor boy to actually buy it. He already bought it, and he's still a poor boy. He must be a rich man. He probably dressed that way on purpose. A few female colleagues could not help but start discussing. Linda did not say anything. At this time, the senior manager who had been sitting by the side drinking coffee laughed disdainfully. Can't you see it yet? Hearing this, all of them turned their heads to look at the senior manager. Linda also had a puzzled look on her face. The senior manager slowly stood up, casually picked up the contract, and said, although this kid signed the contract, where is he? The others looked around in confusion. He didn't come. Isn't that right? The senior manager casually threw away the contract. Although he signed the contract, he didn't come over to complete the payment. To put it bluntly, this contract is like waste paper. Although we can use this contract to sue him, can such a poor kid afford to lose money? Suing him is a waste of time and energy. Hearing the senior manager's explanation, everyone suddenly understood. That was true. The contract did have legal effect, but against such a poor guy, they would not get any compensation even if they sued him. Be no calm. To put it bluntly, Linda's efforts were in vain again today. The female colleagues who were originally very surprised now resumed their original attitude and were mocking Linda. Look, I've already told you, but you still didn't believe me. You wasted your time again. You took a taxi, right? This company won't reimburse you for the fare. Sigh, you didn't earn a single cent and even paid for the taxi. It's not worth it. Faced with their seemingly kind but actually mocking words, Linda's face flushed red. She could not help but said, no. Actually, he paid. As soon as Linda finished speaking, everyone was stunned. The senior manager frowned and walked over to look at Linda. He said word by word, Linda, if you lie about this, the company can punish you. When did you have such a bad habit? Linda looked flustered and nervously took out the POS machine. It's true, he really paid. The senior manager grabbed the POS machine with a puzzled look and started flipping through it, muttering, if I find out that you're lying, I'll immediately report it to the company and fire you. Linda pursed her lips and said nothing. She could not understand why everyone was targeting her. Did she do something wrong? Soon, the senior manager saw the transaction records. 100 million Federation coins, 1-time payment. No discount, no loans. The senior manager was completely dumbfounded. How is this possible? She screamed. At this moment, a man walked over. How is it impossible? Except for Linda, everyone trembled slightly when they heard this. They turned around and looked. It was their boss, Mr. David. Boss. Boss. Everyone took the initiative to greet him, and the senior manager immediately bowed, looking a little nervous. Mr. David bent down and picked up the contract that the senior manager had thrown on the ground. Seeing this scene, the senior manager's face turned pale. Mr. David took a look at the contract and returned it to Linda. He turned to the senior manager and said, is this how you treat the company's contract? The senior manager was criticized and could not utter a single word. She could only lower her head and apologize. Mr. David snorted and said, I heard everything you said just now. To be honest, I've seen how you treat Miss Linda. I just can't find an opportunity to punish you. I'll tell you now. He pointed at the senior manager's nose and said, you want to fire Linda, right? Now, you can leave this company. Right now. After saying that, he turned around and looked at Linda. From now on, you'll be the new senior manager of our company. Facing the sudden change, the senior manager and Linda were equally dumbfounded. When Mr. David faced Linda, his tone became much gentler. Linda, your work attitude has always been very good. I've wanted to praise you for a long time. But unfortunately, you haven't had any successful sales all this time, so I can't casually promote you. I hope you can understand me. As the boss, Mr. David actually spoke to her so gently. Linda was a little flattered and nodded to thank him. Mr. David smiled and said, Linda, this agreement is a very exciting case. I will arrange for people to make this transaction into a case for every new employee to see. Everyone can become our customer, but only people like Linda can grasp this transaction. Hearing Mr. David's words, everyone lowered their heads in shame. The senior manager held Mr. David's hand in panic and said, Boss, please give me another chance. I'm sorry. However, in the face of such a begging, Mr. David would not be merciful at all. Security, drag this person out. The next moment, two strong men standing at the door immediately came over and took her away. Mr. David turned his head and said, although this house has been sold, don't forget to do the follow-up service. You must let this Mr. Mike feel the considerate service of our company. Yes, I will. Linda nodded again. After the house was sold, the sales office would take the initiative to ask the customer if there was anything dissatisfying, and then help the customer solve it. Linda decided to go back to Mike in 2 days and carefully do the after-sales work. After all, she had already decided. If Mike had not bought the house, she would not have encountered these good things. Mike was her lucky star. On the other side, Mike had successfully bought a set of clothes. None of them were less than 10,000 Federation coins. Looking at his new image, even Mike was a little surprised. I didn't expect that a change of clothes will have such a big impact on a person's image. Now, Mike was wearing a delicate yet casual suit. His leather shoes were also very much in line with his age's style. It did not look old-fashioned but made people feel that Mike was a young, energetic, and successful person. Mike was very satisfied with the way he was dressed. It seemed that he would definitely surprise his classmates and teachers when he goes to school tomorrow. Chapter 99. Mike's first day back to school. Mike's changes. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 99. Mike's first day back to school. Mike's changes. The next day, Mike boarded a taxi again. Although he lived just 1 block away from the number 1 high school in New York City, he still could not be bothered to walk. After all, the fare was no longer an unbearable figure. Mike felt it was time to buy a car, but he had not taken his driver's license test yet, and it would take some time to get it. It was a hassle. After entering the school gate, many people turned their eyes to him. The reason was very simple. It was because of Mike's clothes. Even ordinary students could tell at a glance that Mike was wearing branded clothes, and many of them were limited edition. After all, they were all single-item clothes that cost more than 10,000 Federation coins. How could they be ordinary? They all started to guess which family this young master was from. After all, the original Mike was really too inconspicuous. Other than his classmates, practically no one knew him. However, when Mike walked into the classroom, the atmosphere was completely different. "Oh my God, isn't this Mike? You won the lottery." One of his classmates was the first to cry out in surprise. Mike only smiled slightly and did not say anything. At this time, his good friend, little fat Tom, took the initiative to stand up and show off. "You guys still don't know, right? My brother Mike is now a great expert. Do you know," saying this, he glanced at Mike. After all, this was not his own matter but Mike's matter. It had to be approved by Mike before he could share it. However, Mike shook his head, obviously not wanting him to continue. Little fat Tom held back for a while, and finally made a conclusion. "In short, he's rich now." Everyone faced the reality. Although many students were very curious, they did not dare to casually inquire about it. After all, as long as it was related to Second World, it could be considered to be everyone's biggest secret. It was inappropriate to ask about it. However, everyone could see that Mike was no longer the same Mike as before. Soon, Mike sat down in his seat and began to chat with Tom. The atmosphere in the classroom returned to its original state. "Good brother, what level are you now?" Mike took the initiative to ask. Tom waved his hand and said, "Don't mention it. I'm only level 25 now. It's quite hard for me to level up every day, but I reckon that your level should be much higher than mine." Mike smiled slightly and nodded, "Not much. Just a little higher." When Mike logged off yesterday, he was level 33. If this was said by anyone else, they would definitely be perceived as showing off. After all, it had only been 3 days, and a gap of 2 levels was already a huge deal. Level 33 was way higher than level 25, how could it be just a little higher? However, for Mike, it was different. He was an old player who had played for 30 years. In his opinion, the gap of this level was indeed just a little higher. In the later stages, the difference in levels was nothing. It mainly depended on how powerful one's skills were and how good one's equipment was. The two of them chatted casually for a while before another group of people walked into the classroom. It was Blair and his underlings. As soon as they entered the classroom, one of the underlings deliberately said loudly, "Boss Blair, these new clothes of yours must have cost a lot of money. Blair waved his hand happily and said modestly on purpose, not much money. This set is only 5,000 Federation coins. Many students looked at Blair with envy. After all, spending 5,000 Federation coins to buy a set of clothes was not something that many families could afford. In fact, even Blair himself had begged his parents for a long time before his parents agreed to pay for it. After all, Blair had previously activated his A-grade talent, and today was his first day back to school, so it was a reward for him. Normally, Blair's parents would not spend so much money on clothes for him. Hence, Blair was in high spirits now. However, he discovered something was wrong. Although the students looked at him with envy, it was just some. It was completely different from the scene he had imagined where all the students gathered around him and chirped non-stop. Everyone's reaction seemed to be a little too calm. Blair had some doubts in his heart. At this time, he suddenly realized that there seemed to be a few students who kept looking at the last row. Moreover, they seemed to be faintly comparing them to him. Blair frowned slightly and followed their gaze to the last row. The next moment, he was stunned. Was that Mike? Was it really Mike? How could it be? Why did he seem different today? Blair rubbed his eyes and looked carefully again. This time, he saw it. Mike seemed to have changed into a new set of clothes. Furthermore, every one of them seemed to be very expensive. The corners of Blair's eyes twitched twice, and he forced a smile. Yo, isn't this Mike? You actually changed into a new set of clothes. I remember that you wore your last set of clothes for 3 years without losing it. Did you find money today? Although Mike heard Blair's words, he did not look at him at all. He was still chatting with Tom. Obviously, he did not put Blair in his eyes at all. This kind of behavior would obviously infuriate Blair. After all, Blair was the one who activated his A-grade talent. He would be a big shot in the future. Do you know how precious an A-grade talent is? I'm afraid that only 1 in 10,000 people can activate an A-grade talent. Shouldn't Mike be more polite to me and even come over to lick my shoes? What right did he have to be so arrogant? Blair walked over with a face full of anger. The other underlings also followed immediately. He came to Mike's table and slammed down heavily. Mike, are you tired of living? How dare you ignore me? Mike turned his head slightly and looked at Blair. He asked calmly, it's you. What's the matter? This time, before Blair could say anything, his underling took the initiative to speak. Didn't you see what Boss Blair is wearing today? This set of clothes is worth 5,000 Federation coins. Hearing this, Mike finally could not help but laugh. He asked again, so? This time, the underling was speechless. Yes, so. The suit was very expensive, so. It was worth 5,000 Federation coins, so. The underlings were at a loss for words. However, they just thought that Mike should be surprised. At this time, he looked at the suit Mike was wearing and finally thought of what to say. Huh? What do you mean by that? How much is the suit you're wearing? In his imagination, Mike should be feeling ashamed and embarrassed now. However, Mike said casually, it's not expensive. Hearing this, the few of them were ready to mock him. However, Mike's next sentence made them swallow their words. It's just 10,000 Federation coins. Chapter 100. Not 10,000 per set, but 10,000 per piece. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 100. Not 10,000 per set, but 10,000 per piece. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. After saying this, the classroom fell into silence again. Everyone looked at Mike in disbelief. How much did you say just now? This time, it was not his underlings who asked, but Blair. He was a little scared himself. He even wondered if there was something wrong with his ears and that he had misheard. No, He would rather believe that there was something wrong with his ears. After all, this was Mike. How could he afford to buy clothes that were worth 10,000 Federation coins? However, Mike's answer assured him that his ears were fully functioning. 10,000 Federation coins, what's wrong? Mike answered casually with a mocking smile on his face. Faced with his indifferent tone, Blair obviously could not remain calm. Are you kidding me? Stop bragging. Do you think everyone will believe you? Just you wait. I will expose your clumsy lie. He took out his phone and checked Mike's clothes one by one. Soon, he raised his phone and shouted, "Listen up, everyone. Mike is a liar. If his clothes are really a set of 10,000 Federation coins, each of them should be around 2,000 Federation coins. But, I just searched all the luxury goods counters and all the items around 2,000, but I couldn't find these clothes. Obviously, this kid is lying." Hearing this, many people looked at Mike. Even little fat Tom could not help but look over. He knew that his good brother was definitely not lying. After all, he had personally witnessed Mike's relationship with the young master of medieval Rose. However, he was also very puzzled. After all, Blair's words were very convincing. Something had to be wrong. Facing everyone's gaze, Mike sighed and said, "Blair, you've misunderstood. What I mean is, these clothes are 10,000 Federal coins each, not 10,000 Federation coins for one set." After hearing this, Blair was stunned for a moment. Then, he laughed out loud. Following that, his underlings also laughed out loud. It was as if they had heard the biggest joke in the world. 10,000 Federation coins per piece. You. Blair held back his laughter and took out his phone to search again. He said fiercely, "I'll expose your lies in front of everyone immediately." If it was the usual Blair, he would have already made a move. He was not a reasonable person. However, today was different. He had just begged his parents to buy him a set of clothes that added up to 5,000 Federation coins. For him, teaching Mike a lesson was not the most important thing. What was important was that his clothes were the most expensive in the class. He had to prove that to feel proud. Everyone looked at Blair. However, Blair's expression was getting uglier and uglier. Because, he found Mike's clothes, and each one of them was more than 10,000 Federation coins. Moreover, since they were all limited edition Versace items, Blair quickly found them. As for why Mike bought Versace, it was because he was too lazy to look for so many stores, he just chose one randomly. Soon, Blair was speechless. Even the way he looked at Mike changed a little. Because he knew that with Mike's ability, he definitely could not afford these clothes. These days, something must have happened to Mike that made him change. Think about it again. In the past, Mike was so impulsive, every time he would be beaten until his head was bleeding, he never admitted defeat. However, what about the current Mike? He radiated a mature and confident temperament. It was as if everything was under Mike's control. Blair swallowed his saliva, put down his phone, and stopped talking. His underling, on the other hand, took the initiative to ask, "Boss Blair, why aren't you speaking? Quickly expose his lies." These words undoubtedly made Blair even more embarrassed. Blair slapped his underling's face and whispered with a face full of anger, "Shut up." The underling was a little dumbfounded but was too afraid to say anything. Blair turned to look at Mike, his face full of anger, but he did not dare to say anything. Mike, on the other hand, simply smiled and continued to chat with Tom. Obviously, he did not want to continue to be entangled with Blair. Tom, who was at the side, took the initiative to say proudly, "Aren't you going to leave?" The corner of Blair's eyes twitched twice, and he left behind a fierce sentence in a low voice, "You guys just wait." After saying that, he brought his underling back to his seat. He had already decided that after he knew Mike's ID, he would cause him trouble as soon as he entered the game. He was clearly just a trash who had awakened a D-grade talent, yet he actually dared to challenge an expert who had awakened an A-grade talent. This simply made no sense. As for why Mike suddenly became so rich and could even afford those expensive clothes, it was no longer important. So what if Mike became rich now? In Second World, strength was everything. Soon, Peter arrived in the classroom. After 3 days of separation, Peter was very pleased to see his classmates again. He subconsciously glanced at Blair. Then he was slightly stunned. He thought that Blair would be in high spirits today. After all, he had activated his A-grade talent, so he must have accumulated a lot of advantages in Second World. According to his character, he must have felt very proud when he returned to school today. Why did he look a little glum today? Even a little angry. Could it be that his development in the game was not going well? Peter sighed silently. It was normal for a person who had activated a good talent to have a bad development in the game. Development in the game relied on the person. Peter then looked at Mike. Mike was the student he was most worried about. After all, Mike had activated a D-grade talent, which was absolutely devastating. In fact, there might not be a second D-grade talent in the whole school. It could be said that it was a very bad fate. However, Peter, who looked at Mike, was stunned again. Why did Mike look like he is having a good time these days? Moreover, Mike seems to be wearing a new set of clothes. Could it be that Mike didn't log into Second World these days and chose to work instead? Moreover, he has earned some salary over the past 3 days. Peter nodded his head in relief. With Mike's D-grade talent, it's indeed very difficult for him to make a difference in Second World. Although working is a dead-end choice, he can at least live on. This is probably the best choice for Mike. Teacher Peter thought so. Hello, students. I wonder how you are doing after not seeing each other for a few days. Next, please take turns to report your harvest during this period.